The intensity of the war became so great that even the great scrying temple had to turn their eyes away until the silence of the void returned. Once we looked back into their universe, we were met only with darkness and the frozen infinite abyss. Had the two races done the unthinkable and tore their universe asunder? We had no way to know, no means of turning back the clock to peer into what we thought were the final hours of two sentient races. A memorial was erected, the great sins of the council buried, and the chapter of the human and gnomes closed for good. Our somber reflection on our actions was short-lived, however, as the empty void we could peer into began to whisper of something terrifying moving in the shadows. For 50 years we pretended we could hear nothing from the doorway, ignored the signs that our magic was being manipulated somehow, and the rifts that were appearing all throughout the realms. We were fools, obviously, but it was on the anniversary of their supposed extinction that we all awoke to another energy surge that matched the sensation of the century equinox being unleashed. Some took this as a sign of an ancient hero returning from the void, others that the great engine of magic was awakening. But for those of us who knew what the signs were pointing to, it was a toll of the death bell. The sky above our capital city of Nexica Armagi began to burn a blood red as the air itself screamed in agony from the great rift being torn open. A vessel of pure black ripped through the doorway of realities and embedded itself into our council world, from which poured the soldiers of two races we had believed were dead and gone, humans and gnomes. It was as though the phantoms of our great sins had dragged itself from the grave and bore a scythe at us, beckoning us to perish at their hands. Perhaps they were justified in their wrath, given divine authority for what we had done to them. Yet still we fought back. We underestimated the tenacity of their kind once, and we were utter fools to do so a second time. A human warrior with a rifle was more of a threat than even the mightiest orc geomaster, faster and deadlier than an elvish lightning eater, and as unwilling to die as a troll witch saber. Gnome fighters were even more terrifying, as their small size allowed them to gain access to closed-off areas, hide within bags or boxes, and pounce upon unsuspecting casters with blade in hand. The combined might of these two races was a force of controlled chaos that shattered our ranks and drove our determination into the ground under the heel of a boot. Spells met bullets, swords fought tanks, arrows struck mechs, and blood found the ground. They were a tidal wave of fury that was paradoxically as controlled as a finely tuned machine, their motive clear but their methods alarmingly merciful. Unlike what we had forced them to do to one another, they ordained it worthwhile to spare any who laid down their wands in a gesture of surrender. Millions of mages and wizards were put into the black iron cages, their wands and crystals confiscated and locked in the belly of their abyssal craft. Our world itself was given a beating as the tools of our arcane trade were confiscated, collected, and locked away. Soon enough, it was only our citadel that remained, and the 19 great magi within prepared for one final battle. When the great doors to the council chamber shattered, the mages invoked their spells. But it seemed as though the attackers had bent the laws of magic to their will and left the mages powerless. They were all subdued and ordered into their chairs as the leaders of the Joint Species Alliance made their appearance. A gnome man, the president of their race, strode beside the human woman who acted as the great commander of humanity. The two took the 20th seat of the council, and in a twist of irony they claimed the final seat just before declaring the council abolished until reformed under the joint guidance of the invaders. Years passed, enough years for even old fools such as myself to see the truth, and with it came the understanding of the irony. Two races that we had pushed to the brink of extinction for selfish reasons had joined together to survive, turned our greatest tool against us, and ushered in a new era of unrivaled progress and learning. In the end, we had finally achieved the great age of prosperity, though who can say if we truly deserved it? The die had been cast and the story is now written, yet still there is a lesson to be had. Woe be unto the one who looks down upon another and scorns them for their alternative means of living, and doom be upon those who seek to gain by making the small suffer. Doubly so if the one you anger be a human or a gnome. Ah, magic, such a wonderfully splendid and whimsical force that governs our world. The primal drive that forces creatures to evolve and adapt to their surroundings and to grow larger and more powerful than normal. The energy that grants those who hold the title of wizard or sorcerer to conjure forth spells in order to alter the very fabric of reality. Magic, the very same energy that has allowed worlds separated by trillions of miles and boundaries of universes to communicate and transport goods and peoples in an instant. Truly a force for good, would you not say? Well, what if I were to tell you of a race that lacked magic, and were isolated in their own reality without a portal into the great multiverse of wonder? Instead of honing their spellcraft and fighting monsters, these people excelled at science and invention in order to subjugate not just their own world, but the very heaven above them. Yes, they indeed outstretched their hands towards us without knowing, soaring between stars and into the great void beyond to reach us. You know these people well from their 5-digit hands, their bare skin and forward-facing eyes, and their mop of hair they wear atop their head. That is right. I speak of the gnomes. Oh, were you expecting me to say humans? Apologies, I must have overlooked them due to our world having magical humans not born from Earth. Now, to correct myself, I shall begin again. Gnomes, as the multiverse calls them, are a race of short folk with big hearts and even bigger dreams. They lack access to the realm of magic, much the same as the humans of Earth, yet have taken to the skies, the stars, and into the deepest caverns and oceans of many worlds, even without such powers. As people of science, they refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of anything they could not prove or measure with values or metrics. And even when given the opportunity to be given magic, they refused due to it being entirely driven by intuition. A pity, as their race's bodies were quite conductive of magical energies that allow for spellcraft. Now that we have established who they were, it now comes time to discuss why it is that they are viewed with nothing but revulsion and fear. 200 years in the past, at the festival of the century equinox, where all the magical races would rejoice a new wave of magical power, the great magical races held a conference that would reshape the cosmos. There was a council of 19 species, 19 great mages, and 19 great world-uniting portals. But the unified species all believed that a 20th to these numbers would bring about a long-awaited age of prosperity. One issue presented itself right away, and that was that there were only 2 candidates to consider, and none on the council could decide. A terrible plan was made, and through much deliberation it was decided. A secret plot to pit the 2 races against one another would be set in motion, and the survivor would be added to their ranks. It was, in retrospect, an awful idea befitting only a suicidal race that sought to incur the wrath of 2 technologically superior races. Most believed that the factor of magical superiority would level the field if it came to fighting either race, but how that turned out is something not yet up for discussion. Instead, let us go over how this plot was set up. Agents and envoys from the magic worlds were sent to each world and given objectives that would destabilize economic and societal stability. Then planting evidence and falsifying records would make it seem as though their neighbors from across a relatively narrow distance in space were the culprits. The plan was initially quite slow going, as both races deferred to logical discussion and investigation rather than immediate war or hostilities. This was remedied with an unhealthy usage of mind control magic, a small incident of intertwining their information databases, and finally a strong fate disturbance ritual that would cause the planets to send out a signal that activated and detonated a percentage of each world's nuclear and antimatter warheads. Needless to say that both races were tossed into a blind fury once they counted their dead and traced the signal back to its source of the other's homeworld. Thus began the century-long war between humans and gnomes. Ground invasions, orbital bombardments, fleet warfare, and cleansing flames of plasma marked the great reverberations that this war made. Humanity would strike a brutal blow against the short men, followed by a vicious retaliation by the gnomes upon the tall men. The races of magical gifts watched on as both races tore the other apart like a feral beast, gutting each other in kind and tearing limb and eye until both were ragged and bloody. Tens of billions were slaughtered in the first decade, a trillion by the 50th year, and an untold number lost as the century came to a close.